The perfect appetizer was waiting. His surprise party. Our best friends. But the main course walked in early, hand in hand with another woman. They saw a wife. They should have seen a forensic accountant. They didn't know you never give someone like me a reason to audit her own life. Because I won't just find the truth. I will use it to seize everything. My name is Ilara Vance. I am 38 years old, and I am a senior forensic accountant at Aegis Capital Ventures. My job is to find the truth hidden in spreadsheets, to follow the money until it tells a story. On this night, I was not at work. I was at the Alibi, the restaurant I co-owned with my husband, Julian, and our two best friends, Mark and Chloe. I was standing in the warm, dimly lit glow of our main dining room, smoothing the ribbon on a cluster of silver and black balloons. The air smelled of truffle oil and the expensive bourbon Julian loved. It was his 40th birthday, and the room was vibrating with the contained energy of a surprise party. About 30 of our closest friends were hidden in the booths and around the bar, whispering. Chloe, my partner in this venture and my confidant for a decade, beamed at me as she carefully poured champagne into a row of flutes. Her blonde hair was pinned up, and she looked giddy. He is going to be so shocked. Ilara, she whispered, her eyes sparkling. I smiled, a genuine, uncomplicated smile. I hope so. He thinks I forgot. We had built this place from nothing, my financial modeling and his charisma, Mark's operational genius and Chloe's impeccable taste. We called it the Alibi because it was our perfect escape. The music, a playlist of old-school funk Julian adored, was playing softly. Everything was perfect. At 7:15, 15 minutes before he was due to arrive for what he thought was a simple dinner for two, the heavy front door swung open. A collective breath was drawn, everyone tensed, ready to leap out and yell, but the yell died in our throats. Julian stood in the doorway, his broad shoulders filling the frame. He wasn't surprised, he was confused. His eyes widened, scanning the room, catching sight of Mark, of Chloe, of our friends hiding behind pillars. He froze, his face draining of all color, and I saw why. His hand, the one I had held that morning, was tightly clasped in the hand of another woman. She was young, barely in her 20s, with a cascade of platinum blonde hair. Her dress was white and clung to every curve, a stark contrast to the sophisticated, dark wood elegance of the room. The funk music did not fade. It snapped off, as if someone had yanked a cord. The silence that flooded the room was deafening, heavier than any sound. In that vacuum, a single sharp noise exploded, a crystalline shatter. Chloe had dropped her champagne flute. It splintered on the polished concrete floor, a spray of glass and golden bubbles. Julian didn't flinch. He didn't look at the broken glass. He did not look at Chloe. His eyes were locked on me, wide with a specific, animal-like horror, and he did not let go of her hand. That was the fact, the single, unalterable data point. His fingers were still laced with hers. I tore my gaze from my husband and looked at the girl. She was not embarrassed. She was not even flustered. She looked at me, standing there by the birthday balloons, and her chin lifted. A slow, arrogant smirk played on her lips. She sized me up, her eyes dismissive, as if I were the one who had just interrupted, as if I were the one who didn't belong. The room waited for me to break. They waited for the tears, the screaming, the accusations. I could feel their pity and their morbid curiosity pressing in on me. But the wife had left the building. The accountant was in charge. I felt nothing. Just a sudden, sharp clarity, as if the world had snapped into high-definition focus. Julian's face was crumbling, the panic setting in as he finally registered the full scope of his mistake. He dropped the girl's hand, a jerky, spastic motion. "Ilara," he began. His voice was a choked rasp. I held up one hand, silencing him. I turned calmly to the bar. I looked at the untouched champagne flute waiting for me, and I set it down on the dark, polished wood. I did not slam it. I placed it with perfect, steady precision. Then I looked at Chloe, who was frozen, tears beginning to stream down her face, her hand over her mouth. "Cancel the party," I said. My voice did not tremble. It was clear and cold, and it cut through the suffocating silence of the room. I did not look at Julian again. I did not spare the girl another glance. I turned, walked past the Happy 40th banner still hanging crookedly, and pushed open the heavy restaurant door. I stepped out into the cool, crisp Denver night, the sound of my own heels clicking decisively on the pavement. I left them all behind, frozen in the wreckage, breathing in the ringing, awful silence of the truth. I did not go home. The penthouse we shared, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Denver skyline, was no longer home. It was a compromised location. Instead, I drove my gray sedan, a car Julian always called boring, to a nondescript apartment building downtown. This was my safe apartment, a sterile one-bedroom unit I kept under a corporate lease for high-stakes cases, the ones where clients worried about corporate espionage or physical threats. It smelled of nothing, just stale air and industrial carpet cleaner. There were no pictures, no comforts, just a desk, a hardened internet line, and a cot. It was perfect. I walked in, dropped my keys in a glass bowl by the door, and went straight to the steel briefcase I kept in the closet. I did not cry. The shock had frozen into something else, something cold and familiar. It was the feeling I got just before I broke open a complex fraud case. I sat at the desk and opened my specialized laptop. Not my personal machine, but the one Aegis issued me, encrypted and loaded with forensic software that could trace a ghost through a firewall. The screen booted up, illuminating my face in the dark room. The wife was gone. The investigator was here. My marriage of 10 years was now a hostile audit. I started with Julian's business. Thorn Advisory. He called himself a consultant, a connector of people and capital. I had always handled our personal finances, but I respected his privacy, believing his business was his domain. A mistake. A stupid, sentimental mistake. I used a decryption key I'd had for years, a failsafe. I'd told myself, just in case of emergency. This qualified. I entered his servers. I expected to find client lists, invoices, retainers. I found nothing. I pulled the transaction histories. The advisory hadn't billed a legitimate client in 18 months. Not one. Yet, Julian had been living the high life. The new watch, the dinners I wasn't at, the car, and, apparently, the girl. So where was the money coming from? My fingers moved quickly over the keyboard. I left his empty servers and moved to the one place I knew inside and out because I had built its financial architecture, the alibi. I logged into the restaurant's main operating accounts. Everything looked fine on the surface. Food costs were high, liquor invoices were consistent, but I wasn't looking at the surface. I was looking for the parasites. I ran a disbursement analysis, filtering for small, recurring payments that fell just below the threshold that would trigger an automatic review. And there it was. $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, paid out every week, sometimes twice a week, to a single vendor I didn't recognize, Apex Holdings LLC. The invoices were vague, consulting fees. Promotional services. I pulled the incorporation documents for Apex Holdings. It was a shell corporation, registered in Delaware just under 2 years ago. Its listed business address was a post office box in Boulder. The money was flowing from my restaurant, our restaurant, into this ghost company. Julian was stealing from us. From me. My breath hitched, just for a second. It wasn't pain. It was anticipation. The thrill of the hunt. He was sloppy. I accessed the banking records for Apex Holdings. And that's when the floor fell out. Julian was the primary signatory. Of course. But there was a second name. A second person with full access, who had authorized transfers when Julian was out of the country with me. Mark. our best friend, the man who had been the best man at our wedding, the man who had cried with me when my mother passed, the man who was at the restaurant tonight, waiting to yell, "Surprise!" The betrayal wasn't a simple, messy affair. It wasn't a man having a midlife crisis. This was a conspiracy. My partners, my friends, my husband. It was a network. They had been bleeding me dry, using my own restaurant as their personal bank. A cold rage, clean and sharp as a scalpel, settled over me. They thought I was just the wife. They thought I was just the numbers girl who handled the boring paperwork. They forgot what I actually do for a living. I picked up my phone. I didn't call Julian. I didn't call Chloe. I dialed a number I knew by heart. The line clicked. A deep, gravelly voice answered on the first ring. Arthur. Arthur, it's Alara. It's past midnight. Alara, this isn't a social call. I looked at the screen, at the damning line of transfers, at Mark's name next to Julian's. I need you, I said, my voice perfectly level. We have fraud, and I am about to burn it all to the ground. I had not slept. I had spent the last 8 hours in the sterile quiet of the safe apartment, fueled by stale coffee and a cold, clarifying rage. My personal phone, which I had silenced, vibrated incessantly on the desk. 53 missed calls from Julian, 15 from Mark, and at 7 in the morning, a text from Chloe. I'm outside. Please, Alara, we need to talk. I buzzed her up. I wanted to see the look in her eyes when she lied. The door creaked open. Chloe stood there, her face a mess of puffy, red-rimmed eyes. She was holding a brown paper bag from our favorite bakery, the one where we had our Sunday ritual. The smell of warm almonds and butter, a scent I associated with friendship, filled the sterile air. It was a pathetic, transparent performance. Oh, Alara, she whispered, her gaze darting around the barren apartment. This place. I didn't know what to say last night. I was in so much shock. I brought you croissants. She held the bag out, a peace offering. I remained seated at the desk, the glow of my laptop illuminating the dark circles under my eyes. But my gaze was sharp. You were in shock, Chloe. Yes, to see him, to see her. I couldn't believe it. She was a terrible liar. Her voice was too high, too brittle. Then this should really shock you. I didn't move. I simply gestured to the cheap printer on the floor. A single sheet of paper sat in the tray. She put the bakery bag down on the laminate counter and walked over, picking up the sheet. She squinted, confused. It was the signature card for Apex Holdings LLC. What? What is this? She asked, her voice faltering. Some kind of vendor account. It's the shell corporation Julian and Mark have been using to siphon money from the alibi for the last 18 months, I said. My voice was flat, a statement of fact. Chloe's face dissolved. The color drained from her cheeks, leaving a pasty white. She stared at the paper, at the 2 names listed as signatories, Julian Thorne, Mark Reynolds. She didn't deny it. She didn't gasp and say it was a mistake. She collapsed onto the small, beige cot, her body folding in on itself. She dropped the paper as if it were on fire, and then she broke. Not the delicate tears of a concerned friend, but ugly, gulping sobs of a person who had been caught. He promised, she choked out, the words muffled by her hands. The ice in my veins hardened. How long, Chloe? What? She sniffled, looking up, her mascara already a black, runny mess. How long have you known about Sloane? Her eyes darted to the door, a trapped animal's glance. That flicker was the only confession I needed. About 6 months. 6 months. 6 months of planning menus with me. 6 months of sharing wine after a long shift. 6 months of looking me directly in the face, knowing my husband was screwing some girl young enough to be his intern. Why, I asked. It was the only question that mattered. Suddenly, Her grief twisted into something else, something defensive and vicious. She scrambled to her feet, her face contorted. Why? Because you're never present. Ilara, because you're cold. That's what he said. You're always at work, always buried in your spreadsheets, always analyzing everything down to the last cent. He's a passionate man. He deserved to be happy. The accusation hit me, not emotionally, but as a critical piece of data. This was their narrative. I was the frigid, obsessive wife. He was the victim, entitled to happiness, no matter the cost. He deserved to be happy, I repeated, tasting the acid absurdity of the words. So you and Mark let him steal from our company. From me. He wasn't stealing, she shrieked. He was borrowing. Mark was just helping him. With some side investments, he was going to pay it all back. With interest. Investments. I let out a single dry laugh. Is that what he calls her, a 20-something investment? It wasn't just for her, Chloe insisted, her voice cracking. It was to build his own thing, away from you. He said he was tired of living in your shadow, tired of being Mr. Vance. It crystallized. The alibi was never our shared dream. It was just his piggy bank. The entire partnership, the trust I had placed in all three of them, was nothing but a balance sheet for him to exploit. I thought back to the day we signed the operating agreement, 4 years ago. We were in a sterile conference room at a downtown law firm. I had spent weeks drafting the document, customizing every clause. Julian hadn't read a single page. He'd just flipped to the end, pen in hand. God, Ilara, this is why you're the brains. He'd laughed, scribbling his signature. I can't stand this boring wife paperwork. Chloe was still babbling, a waterfall of justifications. He still loves you, Ilara. He got lost. He made a mistake. He didn't get lost, Chloe, I said. My voice was quiet, but it cut through her hysteria. He got caught. I turned back to my laptop and pulled up a file. I read from the screen. Section 9, subsection B, the morality and fraud clause. Chloe's tear-streaked face went blank. The what? The boring wife paperwork, I said. The part Julian couldn't be bothered to read. I put it in all my partnership agreements. It's standard forensic practice. I turned the laptop screen so she could see the highlighted text. It states, I continued, savoring the clean, precise, legal language, that any partner proven to have engaged in willful misconduct, gross negligence, fraudulent activity, or any act that brings the company into severe disrepute, shall be, upon discovery, in immediate and total breach of contract. I let the words hang in the stale air. Chloe was reading, her lips moving silently. What? What does that mean? She whispered, though she already knew. It means, I said, tapping the screen, that as of 3 a.m, when I filed the initial fraud report with our bank, Julian's equity in the alibi was forfeited. His shares, valued at several $1,000,000, reverted to the remaining partners. Her eyes widened in dawning horror as the calculation clicked into place. And since your fiancé, Mark, is a named co-conspirator in that fraud, I added, his shares are also forfeit. She stared at me, the self-righteous anger gone, replaced by the terrifying realization of what I was. But that means you... That's right, I said, closing the laptop. I now own 100% of the restaurant. His shares, Mark's shares. They're all mine, with zero compensation. I stood up and walked to the counter, picking up the bakery bag. The croissants were still warm. I held it out to her. Take your breakfast, Chloe, and get out of my building. Chloe's departure left a vacuum in the small apartment, the smell of almonds turning sour in the air. Her confession about Mark and the borrowing was just noise. It was a distraction, the messy emotional layer designed to obscure the real structure underneath. A simple theft for a mistress was sloppy, but it was understandable. This felt different. The Apex Shell Corporation was too clean, Too simple. It was a drain, but it didn't explain the source. Julian's consulting business had zero income for 18 months, yet he was living like a king. The money he was siphoning from the alibi wasn't enough to fund that lifestyle. Not by a long shot. I turned back to my Aegis laptop. It was time to stop digging at the branches and go for the root. Julian used a private cloud server for his advisory business, thinking it was firewalled and encrypted beyond reach. He didn't know that my firm's proprietary software was designed by men who hunted international money launderers for the government. His consumer-grade firewall was a screen door. I initiated a deep packet inspection, looking for anomalies in his data logs. It took 20 minutes, but I found it a partitioned, hidden drive. It wasn't protected by a complex password. It was just invisible, masked as a system backup file. Arrogant. I unspooled the file, and I found it. The real set of books. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a record of theft. This was a record of deposits. Page after page of wire transfers, massive six-figure sums, pouring into a separate offshore account, one I had never seen before. This wasn't Julian stealing from the restaurant. He was using the restaurant to wash new money. I cross-referenced the dates. A wire for $100,000 would arrive in the offshore account on a Monday. On Wednesday, the alibi's ledgers would show a massive, fraudulent purchase of vintage Bordeaux or Siberian caviar from a new, unknown supplier. The supplier was, of course, another shell company, this one based in the Cayman Islands and controlled by Julian. The dirty money went in. It came out the other side as legitimate restaurant revenue. He wasn't just stealing petty cash, he was laundering. And then I saw her name, Sloane Devereaux. It wasn't on the signature cards. It was in the wire transfer memos. Miami Transfer, SD. Sloane Client Fund. Devereaux Principal. She wasn't the arm candy he was spending money on. She was the money. She, or whoever she represented, was the source of the dirty cash. The alibi, my restaurant, the one I had built with my own name and my own reputation, was a laundromat for her Miami operation. My hands were shaking, not from fear. From a rage so pure and so cold it felt like high-voltage electricity. I kept digging, opening archived email folders on the hidden server. These weren't his personal emails. These were his business communications with his new partners. And that's when I saw my own name. He hadn't just used my restaurant. He had used me. I found an email thread from 8 months ago, addressed to a holding company in Miami. The recipient was asking about the legal structure of the operation, about the risk. Julian's reply was breezy, confident. You don't need to worry about the structure. My wife has personally vetted it. As you know, she's a senior forensic at Aegis Capital. She's the best in the business. She's confirmed the books are clean. I stopped breathing. He hadn't just lied to me. He had lied about me. He had used my professional credentials, my spotless reputation at one of the top financial investigation firms in the country, as a guarantee for his criminal enterprise. He had painted me as his willing partner. He had made me an unwitting accomplice to a federal crime. This was no longer a divorce. This was no longer just fraud. This was a multi-million-dollar money laundering conspiracy, wire fraud, and bank fraud, all wrapped up with my name on the bow. A humorless smile touched my lips. All this time, for 10 years, he had patted my head when I talked about work. He'd called my detailed financial plans boring wife paperwork. He'd dismissed my caution, my insistence on clauses and firewalls, as being too analytical. He thought I was just a mousy bookworm wife who was good with numbers. He had never, not for 1 second, seen me as what I actually am, the person they hire to hunt men exactly like him. He had fatally, completely underestimated me, and he had just handed me all the evidence I needed to destroy him. The sun hadn't risen. I was in Arthur Galloway's conference room, a sterile expanse of glass and steel on the 42nd floor, overlooking a city that was still asleep. The evidence I had compiled in the last 9 hours was mirrored on the 80-inch screen at the head of the table. Arthur, a man who wore 3-piece suits as if he were born in them, took a slow sip of black coffee. He had the reptilian stillness of a man who bills $2,000 an hour. He used your name, Alara, Arthur said, his voice a low gravel. He leveraged your reputation at Aegis. This isn't a simple marital implosion. This is a controlled demolition, and he intended for you to be at ground zero. He won't be, I replied, my voice steady. I felt no fatigue, just the cold, sharp focus of a complex audit reaching its conclusion. We execute the plan as discussed. This was the controlled demolition, financial edition, my edition. Step 1, I said, insulation. I pointed to a complex corporate structure chart I'd sketched on the whiteboard. Julian always mocked what he called my web of paranoia. He never understood why I routed my salary, my bonuses, and my inheritance into a series of discrete LLCs and trusts. He called them my boring tax shelters. They're not boring now, Arthur noted. No. They ensure my name is not on the penthouse. The Vance Family Trust owns it. They ensure my primary capital is not in our joint accounts. And they ensure that my holding company, which technically owns my stake in the alibi, is legally firewalled from its operations. So, you are insulated from the liability he created, Arthur summarized. Good. Now, we freeze him out. Step 2, Arthur said, picking up his secured phone. I'm filing the emergency injunction. I've already spoken to Judge Miller's clerk. We are citing aggravated fraud, conspiracy, and immediate risk of asset flight. By 9 o'clock this morning, every account tied to the alibi and Thorne advisory will be frozen solid. He won't be able to buy gas. Step 3. I opened my Aegis laptop and executed a pre-written command. While you handle the courts, I handle the partners. I sent the email. It was a formal legal notification addressed to Mark Reynolds and Chloe Davis. I am officially invoking Section 9, Subsection B of the Operating Agreement, the Morality and Fraud Clause. As of this moment, based on their admitted complicity in a criminal conspiracy to defraud the company, their equity shares are forfeited, in full. Their shares were worth millions, Arthur said, a rare flicker of approval in his eyes. Their shares, I corrected, are now worth 0. They just spent 4 years building my portfolio. Step 4, the assets. I looked at my list. He drives a black Maserati Gran Turismo. He loves that car more than he ever loved me. But he was careless. It's leased by my holding company as a corporate expense. He's not an employee of that company. I dialed the leasing bank's 24-hour repossession line. Yes, I need to report unauthorized use of a corporate asset. Vehicle identification number is... I read the number from memory. The driver is Julian Thorne. He is no longer affiliated with my company. Yes, he is in possession of it now. Thank you. I hung up. They'll have a truck out by noon, probably sooner. They do not play around. Step 5, I continued. The penthouse. I dialed the building's head of security, a man I had personally vetted. Mr. Rodriguez, this is Alara Vance. I am invoking a security protocol on Unit 3501. I have confirmation of unauthorized access. I need an immediate security sweep and a full lock replacement. All keycards, all digital codes, effective immediately. Yes, including Mr. Thorne's. I disconnected and looked at Arthur. He'll be homeless by lunch. Step 6. I ran one final search, a hard query on the restaurant's tax identification number against the major credit bureaus. I was looking for last-minute loans, desperation moves. A new file popped up. My stomach tightened. It was an application, dated 3 days ago, to a high-risk secondary lender. Arthur. He walked over, looking at the screen. A bridge loan, $500,000. He was trying to drain the company's value before whatever he had planned. He was going to gut it and run, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I scrolled down the PDF of the application, and then I saw it, the signature page, to secure the loan against the restaurant's assets. He needed my signature as the 50% owner. And there it was, my name, Alara Vance. It was a clumsy, pathetic forgery, a digital scribble that looked nothing like my actual signature. He had gotten so arrogant, so convinced of my ignorance, that he hadn't even tried to make it look real. He just assumed no one would ever check. He assumed I would never check. Arthur Galloway leaned in, his eyes gleaming. He finally smiled. It was not a kind expression. It was the smile of a great white shark that has just tasted the first drop of blood in the water. "He's a fool," Arthur said, his voice rich with satisfaction. "He's just escalated this from a simple partnership dispute into a federal crime. That, Alara, is forgery. And that," he tapped the screen, "is attempted bank fraud." He stepped back and straightened his tie. "We have him. We have him cold." I was back in Arthur's conference room, watching the afternoon sun glint off the neighboring skyscrapers. My personal phone, which I had left on for this specific purpose, began to vibrate. I looked at the screen. Julian Thorne. I let it ring twice, then activated the recording software on my secure device before answering. "Hello, Alara. What the hell is going on?" His voice was sharp, annoyed, but not yet panicked. "I'm in the lobby. My key's not working. The concierge says it's been deactivated." "What's wrong, Julian?" My voice was perfectly calm, cool, as if inquiring about the weather. "What's wrong? I'm standing here. I can't get into my own apartment. Turn my key back on. Now." "I'm afraid that's not possible," I said, looking at the spreadsheet on my laptop. "That is not your apartment. Julian." There was a heavy pause on the other end of the line. I heard him take a sharp breath, his tone shifting instantly from command to a slick, practiced charm. The one he used to close deals, the one he used to use on me. "Baby, look, I know you're upset," he crooned. "Last night was a complete, terrible misunderstanding. I can explain everything. Just let me come up, and we can talk this out. I love you. You know that." "There's nothing to explain," I replied, my voice empty of emotion. "Alara, stop this childish—" He cut himself off. I heard his muffled voice speaking to someone else, likely the concierge, Mr. Rodriguez, a man I trusted implicitly. Then he was back on the line, his voice tight. Fine. You want to play it this way, I'll just get a room at the hotel. I'm taking Sloan upstairs. I'll deal with you when you've cooled off." I waited. I heard the sound of a credit card sliding through a reader. A short, sharp beep. "What do you mean? Declined?" His voice was suddenly an octave higher. "That's impossible. Run it again. It's a premium black card." I heard the slide and beep again. "Sir, that card is also declined." The concierge's voice, polite and firm, drifted through the receiver. "As is the next one. It appears all your accounts have been frozen pending a fraud investigation." The silence on the line was electric. The charm, the annoyance. It all evaporated, replaced by the raw, ugly sound of a cornered animal. "Alara," he roared, a sound so violent I pulled the phone an inch from my ear. "What did you do? What the hell did you do to my accounts? You're going to pay for this when I get my hands on you. You will regret—" I cut him off, my voice dropping to the temperature of ice. "Are you threatening me, Julian? Because this call is being recorded and will be provided to my attorney and the Denver police." He stopped. The only sound was his ragged, furious breathing. He knew the game. He hung up. I knew what he was doing next. He would be standing in the lobby, the expensive shopping bags pooled at his feet, Sloan watching him, her own expression likely souring as she realized her new benefactor was penniless. His public humiliation would be burning him alive. He would be calling his partners, his safety net. He would dial Mark. The call would go straight to voicemail. He would dial Chloe. Voicemail. He would try them again and again, pacing the marble lobby, his face darkening with rage and a new, unfamiliar feeling. Fear. Julian didn't know that Mark and Chloe were just down the hall, in Arthur's other conference room. They had been here for an hour. Arthur was in there with them, laying out their new reality in his precise, brutal monotone. I knew what he was telling them. Option 1. They remain loyal to Julian, and they are charged as full co-conspirators in a federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and money laundering operation. They would lose their homes, their freedom, and any future they ever imagined. Option 2. They cooperate. They give us everything. They sign over their statements, their passwords, their testimony. In exchange, Arthur would petition the U.S. Attorney's Office to classify them as material witnesses, not defendants. They would still be ruined, their shares in the alibi worthless, but they might stay out of prison. Chloe would be a puddle of tears. But Mark was a creature of self-preservation. He had a house, a reputation. He was weak, and Julian had thrown him to the wolves. My desk line buzzed. It was Arthur, patching Mark through. His voice was a hollow shell. "Ilara." "Mark," I replied. He has a physical backup," Mark said, his voice cracking. "It's not all on the cloud. He was too paranoid. It's a hard drive. It has the real ledgers, the ones from Miami, the names, the offshore accounts, everything, the real evidence." I sat up, my heart thumping. I had the digital breadcrumbs. This was the murder weapon. "Where is it?" "In his office at the Alibi. He thought it was clever. It's in a wall safe, hidden behind that antique map of Denver. He showed it to me once, when he was drunk. The combination." Mark paused, and I heard him swallow. "It's his birthday. The one we were all there for. 401184. He had just given me the final key. The last betrayal. Thank you, Mark. Stay with Arthur. Do exactly as he says." I hung up the phone. The rat was in the trap. Now it was time to collect the evidence and burn the maze down. While Julian was imploding in a public lobby, I was moving. The Alibi was closed. The "closed for emergency maintenance" sign I'd had the night manager post still taped to the glass. I let myself into the back office with my own key. The antique map of Denver was just as I remembered, slightly crooked. I slid it aside. The wall safe was cheap, the kind you buy at an office supply store. I entered the combination Mark had given me, 401184, his 40th birthday. The heavy door clicked open. Inside, beneath a stack of expired passports and some emergency cash, was a sleek, black external hard drive, the real ledger. I took it and walked out, leaving the empty safe open. Back in the sterile confines of the safe apartment, I plugged the drive into my workstation. It was encrypted, but Julian used the same password for everything he thought was secret, the name of the boat he'd always wanted. The Albatross. I was in within seconds. He was a fool. I didn't look at the numbers. I already knew the numbers. I went for the communications folder, the emails, the texts. I needed to know the why of the girl. I needed to know Sloane. My public-facing searches on her had been a dead end, a curated wall of Miami socialite nonsense. Instagram photos on yachts, vague mentions in party columns. It was a flimsy, expensive facade. I didn't need public records. I had Julian's, and Julian, in his arrogance, had kept everything. I found the file on her. He had run his own background check, probably to assess his risk. Sloane Devereaux wasn't her real name. She was born Sloane O'Malley in Hialeah, Florida. The family she referenced in her texts wasn't Miami old money. Her two uncles were the O'Malley brothers, mid-level players in the South Florida drug trade. They were moving cocaine, and they were notoriously violent. Sloane was not the arm candy. She was the front. She was the one tasked with taking the family's blood money and making it clean. She was trying to buy her way up, to launder her name as well as her cash, and she, or her uncles, had chosen Julian. Why he was a small-time charmer? He was nothing. The answer was on the hard drive, in an email thread from 10 months ago. Sloane was getting nervous about the structure of the shell companies. Julian's reply, slick and confident, made my blood turn to ice. "Sloane, You're paying for the best. My wife is personally structuring the firewall. As I told you, she's a senior partner at Aegis Capital. She handles this for billionaires. She's the best. The books are bulletproof because she built them. He hadn't just used my name. He had sold me. He had packaged my reputation, my career, and my credentials as part of his criminal enterprise. It got worse. I found a separate accounting ledger. It wasn't just the money laundering. It was a side fraud. He was charging Sloan a risk premium for my services, $50,000 a month, wired to a separate account that he claimed was my fee for staying silent and participating. The entire picture snapped into focus. That look she gave me at the restaurant, the arrogant, dismissive smirk. Sloan Devereaux didn't think I was the betrayed wife. She didn't see me as a victim. She saw me as her greedy, overpriced business partner. She thought I was in on it. She thought I was the financial mastermind, the one taking a massive cut to keep the operation clean. Last night, when she saw me, she wasn't looking at the woman whose husband she had stolen. She was looking at the woman she thought was trying to cut her out of the deal. This changed the equation completely. This was not a love triangle. This was a criminal conspiracy that had just imploded. A jilted mistress is one kind of problem, but a spurned partner from a violent drug trafficking family who believes you've just helped steal millions of dollars from her. That was a different kind of threat. Sloan wasn't just heartbroken or embarrassed. She was compromised. She would be looking for her money. And Julian had just painted a target. My name and face, right on my back. He had made me the enemy of a woman far more dangerous than he could ever be. The hard drive from Julian's safe was a Rosetta Stone of his crimes, combined with Mark's terrified signed affidavit. I had an irrefutable timeline. I didn't just have the digital transfers. I had the physical ledger, the primary source. I was no longer interested in a quiet divorce. This was not a negotiation. It was a recovery of stolen assets and a criminal prosecution. I wanted justice. I wanted compensation. And I wanted to ensure he could never, ever leverage my name again. He's expecting a lawsuit. Ilara, Arthur said, reviewing the final evidence file. He's expecting a screaming match. He thinks this is a domestic dispute. He's wrong, I replied. This is a corporate execution. We're not dragging this through the divorce courts for years. We're ending it. Tomorrow. I owned 100% of the alibi. I had the legal right to call any meeting I wished. Set it up, I told Arthur. An emergency shareholder meeting, tomorrow, 10 o'clock in the morning, at the restaurant. Arthur's shark-like smile returned. A shareholder meeting where you are the only shareholder. I like it. They're not shareholders, I said. They are former partners being called to account for their malfeasance. Send the summons. Julian Thorne, Mark Reynolds, Chloe Davis. Attendance is mandatory as per the original operating agreement they all breached. Julian is homeless and his accounts are frozen. He'll be desperate. He'll come. Arthur mused. Mark and Chloe are terrified of prison. They'll come. They will, I agreed. But they aren't the only guests. I drafted 2 more invitations. The first was to Mr. Harrison at the bank's corporate fraud division, the man whose department had flagged the $500,000 loan attempt. I invited him and his team to present their findings regarding the fraudulent loan application at our meeting. They confirmed within the hour. The final invitation was the most delicate. It went out via a legal courier to the hotel where Julian had last been seen. It was addressed to Ms. Sloan Devereaux. We can't serve her a summons, Arthur cautioned. I'm not, I replied. I'm inviting her, as a materially interested party to a fraudulent loan attempt. I'm framing it as a financial inquiry. I'm going to let her believe she has a claim to the money Julian stole. She won't see me as a wife. She'll see me as the person who controls the frozen assets. She'll come to get her money. This is a volatile mix. Ilara, Arthur said, the first note of genuine caution in his voice. A broke, narcissistic husband, 2 terrified, ruined friends, a representative from a drug cartel, and 2 bankers. Which is why, I said, You will ensure we have security for the meeting. Just a precaution, given the hostile nature of the asset forfeiture. I'll have 2 off-duty plainclothes officers from the Financial Crimes Unit, Arthur said, already dialing. They'll be discreet, until they're not. The stage was set. The next morning, I arrived at the Alibi at 8 o'clock, 2 hours early. The restaurant was silent, the chairs still stacked on the tables from the night of the failed party. The air was stale, smelling of spilled champagne and betrayal. I went to the private dining room, the one with the large screen we used for corporate events. I plugged in my laptop and powered on the projector. The screen lit up, illuminating the dark, empty room. I opened my presentation. The title slide was simple: The Alibi and Audit of Operations, E. Vance, Aegis Capital Ventures. This was not a collection of memories. There were no photographs of our wedding, no smiling vacation snapshots. The first slide was a flowchart, a complex web of arrows showing the exact path of the money, from the Miami holding company to the Cayman Shell, to the Alibi's vendor list, to the Apex LLC, and finally to Julian's personal offshore account. The next slide was a series of intercepted emails: Julian's, Mark's, and Julian's email to Sloan's associates, assuring them his forensic accountant wife had personally guaranteed the structure. The final slide was the centerpiece: a high-resolution scan of the $500,000 loan application, and next to it, an authenticated copy of my real signature. The forgery was laughably bad. I ran through the presentation once, my voice echoing slightly in the empty room. It was precise, analytical, and absolutely devastating. It was not an accusation from a wife. It was the final report of a forensic accountant, and it was finished. I sat down at the head of the long mahogany table. I poured myself a glass of water, and I waited for my guests to arrive. The night before the meeting, I did not go to Arthur's office. I did not go out. I returned to the safe apartment. The silence of the room was absolute, a neutral space defined only by its lack of personality. There was no art, no mementos. There was just the desk, the cot, and the humming glow of my workstation. It was a place for work, and I had one final task. I projected the presentation against the blank beige wall. I ran through it one last time, my voice quiet in the small room. It was perfect. It was not an emotional plea from a wounded wife. It was an irrefutable, deeply researched forensic audit. Each slide was a nail. Slide 1, the flowchart, a beautiful, terrible map of their conspiracy. Slide 2, the fake invoices for $10,000 cases of wine that never existed. Slide 3, the wire transfers from Miami, cross-referenced with the deposits into the Cayman account. Slide 4, Mark and Chloe's electronic signatures, approving the fraudulent vendor payments. Slide 5, the email where Julian used my name, my reputation, as a shield for his crimes. Slide 6, the loan application, the forged signature, the bank fraud. It detailed every dollar stolen, every lie told, every law broken. It was the tightest case I had ever built. My personal phone, which I had kept on only to receive the summons confirmations, lit up on the desk. A text message. It was from Julian. It was the first time he had tried to contact me since the disastrous recorded phone call in the lobby. The message read, "Elara, stop this crazy stuff. This isn't you. This meeting. The lawyers." "It's insane. I'm coming home. We can fix this. Just tell me where you are. I still love you." I read the words over and over. I still love you. I waited for the familiar sting of betrayal. I waited for the hot rush of anger. I waited for the cold, hollow ache of grief that had been my shadow for 10 years, even when I didn't know why. Nothing came. I felt nothing at all. The words on the screen were just data points, pieces of a last-ditch, failed negotiation tactic. They had no emotional value. The man who wrote them was not my husband. He was the subject of an investigation. And the woman he was writing to, she didn't exist anymore. The forensic accountant had fully and finally overwritten the wife. The part of me that could be hurt by him, that could be charmed, that could be gaslit into believing the lies, was gone. It had died on the floor of the alibi, in the shattering silence after the music stopped. What was left was the professional, the analyst, the woman who balanced the books. I turned back to my laptop. On the desktop, there was one remaining personal file I had overlooked, a photograph. It was from our 5th anniversary, 5 years ago. We were in Italy, on a balcony overlooking the water. He was holding me, his head thrown back in a laugh, the sun catching his hair. I was looking at him, my expression one of complete, unguarded adoration. I looked so young, so foolish. I stared at the image of the woman I used to be, the woman who believed in him, the woman who thought boring paperwork was just an exasperated joke. I clicked on the file. I dragged the icon over to the small trash can in the corner of the screen. I did not hesitate. I right-clicked the trash can icon. My hand was perfectly steady. Empty trash. A small window popped up. "Are you sure you want to permanently delete this item?" I clicked yes. The file was gone. The ledger was balanced. I powered down my workstation. I picked up my personal phone, the one still glowing with his useless, empty words. I held the side button down. I slid my finger across the screen. Slide to power off. The screen went black. I walked to the simple cot in the corner. I did not check the locks. They were already secure. I did not review my notes. They were already memorized. I lay down, fully clothed, and pulled the thin blanket over me. I fell asleep within minutes, a deep, dreamless, and utterly peaceful sleep, for 8 full hours, for the first time in a decade. The audit was complete. All that was left was to present the findings. The restaurant was silent. It was 10 o'clock in the morning, and the alibi was closed to the public. The chairs were stacked, the air still heavy with the scent of stale wine and betrayal from the party that never happened. I sat at the head of the long mahogany conference table in the private dining room. Arthur stood to my right. The screen behind me was blank, glowing with a faint white light. They arrived separately, as I knew they would. Mark and Chloe were first, looking gray and hollowed out, like ghosts. They sat at the furthest possible end of the table, avoiding my gaze. Next came the 2 representatives from the bank's fraud division, Mr. Harrison and his associate. They sat near the door, all business, carrying briefcases. Then, the 2 plainclothes officers Arthur had requested entered, taking up positions near the main exit, looking bored. Sloane Devereaux arrived at 10:05. She was not the party girl from the other night. This was a different woman. She wore a severe black pantsuit, her blonde hair pulled into a tight, low ponytail. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept the room, cataloging the bankers, the cops, and me. She clearly thought this was a negotiation over her frozen assets. She sat alone, halfway down the table, her purse clicking as she placed it in front of her. Julian was the last to arrive, bursting through the door at 10:10, projecting an aura of aggrieved importance. He had managed to find a clean shirt, but he looked wrecked. His eyes were bloodshot, and his hand trembled slightly. He saw me at the head of the table. He saw the bankers. He saw Sloane. His gaze hardened. "Ilara, what is this?" he demanded, trying to take control. "Some kind of ambush." I clicked the remote. The projector hummed, and the title slide lit up the screen. "Good morning," I said, my voice perfectly even, cutting through the heavy silence. "Welcome to the audit of the alibi." Julian's face went pale. "I will be brief." I continued. "For the last 18 months, this restaurant has been used as a front for a multi-million-dollar money laundering operation." I clicked to the next slide. The flow chart. Funds were wired from a shell corporation in Miami, laundered through fraudulent invoices for non-existent goods, primarily high-end wine and caviar, and then siphoned into a second shell corporation, Apex Holdings. Sloane's eyes were fixed on the chart, her face impassive. Apex Holdings, I continued, was controlled by two signatories. I clicked again. The signature card appeared. Julian Thorne and Mark Reynolds. At the end of the table, Mark made a small, choked sound. He pushed his chair back and stood up, his body trembling. Alara, I'm sorry, he whispered, his voice cracking. I swear, I thought it was just borrowing. He told me it was a short-term investment. Chloe dissolved, burying her face in her hands, her sobs echoing in the room. This is absurd, Julian roared, slamming his fist on the table. This is a private marital spat. You can't just… You're airing our dirty laundry. This is not a marital spat. Mr. Thorne, Arthur's voice boomed, silencing the room. This is a criminal conspiracy, and I advise you to sit down. Julian looked from Arthur's cold eyes to the two officers by the door. He sat. We are almost finished, I said. I advanced to the final slide. The screen split into three parts. The $500,000 loan application, a high-resolution scan of my forged signature, and next to it, a scan of my real, authenticated signature. This, I said, is an attempt at bank fraud dated 3 days ago. And who was this $500,000 payout for? According to Mr. Thorne's hidden ledger, it was for his partner. I turned my head and looked directly at Sloane Devereaux. A partner, I said, who believed she was paying my husband for my professional services. A partner who believed I, a forensic accountant, was complicit in laundering her family's drug money from Florida. Sloane's mask of cold composure finally shattered. She didn't look at me. Her gaze, filled with a terrifying cold fury, snapped to Julian. He lied to me, she whispered. Then, louder, he lied to me. She shot to her feet, her chair crashing backward. You told me she was your partner. You told me she was demanding the $50,000 monthly fee. You said you were rich. You used my money. You lost my family's money. It was the end. Julian was cornered, exposed by both his wife and his mistress. He did the only thing he had left. He lunged. He didn't go for Sloane. He came for me. You bitch, he screamed, vaulting across the table, his hands reaching for my throat. He never touched me. The two plainclothes officers moved with practiced speed, intercepting him mid-air. They slammed him, face first, onto the mahogany table. Police, you are under arrest. Get off me, Julian bellowed, his voice muffled. You have no proof she's a hysterical wife. You can't. I reached into my blazer pocket, took out my secure recorder, and pressed play. My own voice, calm and cold, filled the room. Are you threatening me, Julian? And then his roaring, full of hate. When I get my hands on you, you will regret. Julian went silent. The fight drained out of him. One officer cuffed his hands behind his back and hauled him to his feet. Julian Thorne, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, bank fraud, and making criminal threats. The other officer turned to Sloane, who was standing, frozen, by her chair. Ma'am, we'd like you to come downtown with us. We have several questions for you regarding money laundering. They were let out. Julian, defeated. Sloane, silent, her mind already working, calculating her next move. The bankers, looking satisfied, packed their briefcases and followed. The room was silent again, save for the sound of Chloe's weeping. I turned off the projector. The room plunged into semi-darkness. I walked to the end of the table and looked down at the two people who were once my best friends. The restaurant will reopen on Monday. Under new management, I said. My voice was flat. As per the fraud clause you both ignored, your shares are worthless. Your employment is terminated. Mark looked up, his face a ruin. He just nodded. Chloe couldn't even look at me. Get out. They fled, stumbling out of the room, leaving me alone. I stood in the silence of my restaurant. The books were balanced. The accounts were settled. I was, finally, in complete control. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from, so please comment below and let's share our thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and give it extra support by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this story.